or be a reminder to me to turn on record. And once the session is over, I'll be taking the video and posting it online so that I can send it to you via link. So if you want to review it again at your own leisure, or even share it with some of your colleagues who weren't able to make it today, you're free to do so. And any links that Drew shares today about today's topic, I'm going to be also sending to you in that follow-up email, so you don't have to kind of rush and write things down. We're happy to send it all to you in one nice package. So without further ado, Drew, it's all yours. Take it away.
Cool, thanks, Vanessa. So like Vanessa said, my name is Drew, one of the librarians here at Weill. And what we're going to talk about today are preprints, which as a topic has been around for a couple decades, maybe more, very long-standing kind of like publishing tradition. But recently they've been getting a lot of buzz and a lot more interest, primarily due to COVID-19 and the need to really get information out quickly. So the way we're going to do that is talk about what exactly are preprints. There's a lot of sort of different terminology that's used in the publishing world. So we're going to talk about what they are and what people mean when they say, this is a preprint server, stuff like that. Why we should think about making them available to others, why we should share them, some of the ways that we can do that. And finally, some of the considerations that you have to think about when you're starting to think, oh, do I want to make my manuscript available? Do I want to make my preprint available? And things like that. So it's very talky, so it's hopefully we'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions. But for now, this is how we're going to do this. So let's go ahead and get rolling exactly with what preprints are. So this is just one sort of like very broad definition. You'll see this represented in kind of many different ways. But at its most basic level, when someone refers to a preprint, they're basically meaning any version of a manuscript that's been written for journal publication or something like that, but that manuscript prior to peer review. And we're going to talk a little bit, or we're going to talk mostly about preprints during this talk, because it's sort of like the new kid on the block, and like the newest of the new kids on the block. Like the Joey McIntyre of like viable publishing options. But we can't really do that without also talking about the other forms of publication that are out there, namely postprints, which is the version of the manuscript that exists after peer reviewer comments have been received. And those NIH people out there who are funded, this is usually the version of the article that you're going to be depositing into something like PubMed Central for your NIH public access policy. So we have preprints, pre-peer review, postprints, post-peer review, and then finally the published version of the article, which is typically the version that you download from journals that you get access to through PubMed. It's the version of your article that's been typeset, copy edited, also referred to as the version of record, depending on what you're looking at. So I'm going to kind of use all three of these terms during the talk. So if anyone has any questions as we're going along, pop something in the comment section and we'll address it either as we're going or later on. So again, preprint, pre-peer review, postprint, post-peer review, published version of record. Cool. So hopefully that is set in stone. So why we actually are interested in preprints and why we might want to think about sharing them and making them available out in the world. Most importantly, especially right now, is that this is by far the quickest route to publication. You can essentially upload a preprint to preprint servers, which we'll talk about in a minute, the second after you hit save on your Word doc and you're done with your manuscript. You can finish it up, upload it to a preprint server, and basically be done with it. Because of this very fast route of dissemination, preprints have become very popular recently to get COVID information out. And this has pluses and minuses. It's not peer reviewed. People are rushing stuff out. But as a way to get your information out there very quick, this is the best way to go. Kind of more importantly, depending on what your sort of goals as a publisher are, it acts as an open access free version of your article. As I mentioned before, preprints are not peer reviewed, so it's not going to be the final version of your article, but it is a version of your article. And for some people, that's very important. You want to have something that people that don't have access to millions of dollars worth of subscriptions, and if they can't have access to the final version of the article, they might be able to have access to the preprint or the postprint, depending on some considerations, which we'll talk about in a second. Also, what's very nice is that it provides a nice citable product. And what that means is that it gives something that other people can cite that's not necessarily a published journal article. So some of the manuscripts that get uploaded and shared never make it to publication as an official journal article. There's various reasons why that might happen, but it lets a author and a group of researchers make their information available and citable. And the citability is sort of one of the more recent innovations in preprint technology and the preprint servers that we're going to talk about in a second. But it's quick. It gives you an essentially free open access version of your article without publishing in an open access journal necessarily. And it gives you something that other researchers can cite. So quick, free, and citing are three very nice things to think about when you're going the preprint route. So if you decide that this is something that you want to pursue, there are a couple of things that you need to consider. The first thing, and probably the most important, definitely the most important, is does the journal allow it? So we've talked a little bit about what preprints are, and they're the pre-peer review manuscripts. Often you can submit it to these servers right after you finish writing it. So you're automatically going to think, well, how do I know what journal is going to be interested in this, or what journal I'm ultimately going to publish to? And the answer to that is you may not know. So what I tend to recommend is develop a list of journals that you're going to be interested in publishing in, and then consult a tool called Sherpa Romeo that basically aggregates all of this information about preprints, postscripts, manuscripts, what can be shared, what can be made available, and puts them all in one place with standardized language so that you don't have to go poking around to each individual journal and find what their policies are and whether or not you can share your preprint or your postprint. It's a very nice tool. It's updated pretty regularly. The layout is pretty similar to what you'll see here. It'll tell you what sort of prereqs are required. If there's an embargo meaning how long until your article can be made available. Some journals say you can upload it, but it can't be made publicly available for 12 months or 6 months or something like that. So that information will be represented here. Who owns the copyright, where you can put it, any possible conditions that might happen. So again, the Sherpa Romeo to check and make sure whether or not you're even allowed to upload your preprint to a preprint server or your postprint to some other tool that is available to you. Again, very important. If your journal does not allow you to upload into a preprint and you've already uploaded it to a preprint server, you're going to have issues with the journal wanting to go forward with the publication of your article. So it's something to think about, keep in the back of your mind. So another thing to consider, as with any sort of publication, you always want to make sure that if you have potentially patentable technology, you want to consult Cornell Ithaca Center for Technology Licensing. You always want to make sure that you have all of your I's dotted and your T's crossed when you're dealing with potentially patented information. So you don't want to just toss something up all willy-nilly on the internet to a preprint server if there's a patent application involved with that as well. So for something that you're working on, always reach out to the Center for Technology Licensing. Always a good method to do that, even if you're just publishing a regular journal article, just to make sure that everything is covered. So another very important thing to consider when you're talking about preprints and preprint servers is where are you in your publishing cycle? So we'll talk a little bit more about a specific preprint server in a second, but in general, most of them are only interested in receiving your preprint before it's been accepted by a journal. So prior to journal acceptance, when you're still in the submitting phase, you can submit to a preprint server. After your journal, or after your manuscript has been accepted, the preprint window has essentially closed. And then now, if you still want to make it available, you're looking at uploading your postprint into a repository or an archive or something like PubMed Central. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, just sort of give the flip side to the preprints. So again, before journal acceptance, you're able to upload into preprint servers. Most of them have deadlines of journal acceptance that you can't publish after that. But if you do decide you want to make a version of your manuscript shareable, you can upload the postprint into repositories or archives, again, if the journal allows you to do that. So what do I mean when I'm talking about preprint servers? It's essentially a very specific type of archive that accepts only preprints, and they're built specifically to handle these preprints and some of the logistics that come along with handling these types of manuscripts. In general, they don't include peer review as we traditionally know it. So a lot of times when you're seeing things on preprint servers, these are not peer-reviewed manuscripts as we traditionally know it. Talk a little bit more about that in a second, but there are dozens and dozens of preprint servers that exist. Right now, sort of the one that's getting the most buzz for medicine and health sciences is something called medRxiv. Something supported by Cold Spring Harbor and Yale. And it is the sort of go-to place for probably most of the people on this call if you're interested in making your preprints available. I have no issue with pushing anyone who would ask for us to medRxiv to host their preprints. Some specifics about medRxiv. Submissions are screened, but not necessarily peer-reviewed. So they're screened for things like applicability, relevance, to make sure they fit in sort of the scope of what medRxive's doing. And they sort of do a little bit of screening to filter out, potentially negative public health considerations and things like that. But again, not necessarily peer-reviewed like you would expect. Most importantly, they update records when full articles are published. So you can upload your preprint manuscript. And if you notice back on the Sugar Romeo page, there's this thing that says conditions must link to publisher version. I've never not seen that as a condition to making these things available. You almost always have to link it directly to the final published article if it exists. And what these preprint servers allow you to do is to not have to think about that. So they handle that on the back end because despite all of our best intentions, we upload a manuscript in to medRxiv, 6 months to a year later, it gets published somewhere. We're not going to go back and remember to do that. It's not going to happen. So medRxiv is great because they actually do that for you, and it takes that little bit of administrative work off your plate. It also allows manuscripts to be updated. So if you upload it initially and then you realize that there's been a mistake or there's been an error, you can continue to upload revised manuscripts up until the point of peer review and acceptance. They won't accept peer review changes. Most importantly is that it cannot be removed. So if you uploaded your preprint manuscript to medRxiv and then you've gone through all of the journals that you were expecting to publish this in, hoping that one of these journals would accept it. You've already checked all of these journals. They are okay with you uploading it into medRxiv. However, you get down to a journal that has accepted your paper, but they do not allow versions of the manuscript to be in medRxiv. That will essentially disqualify you from publishing in that journal. So it's something that you need to consider if you are thinking about publishing in the medRxiv route. It's becoming increasingly rare that journals and publishers don't allow preprints to be uploaded in some sort of centralized location, but it still could happen, so be aware of that. You can't just write medRxiv and say, hey, I'm going to publish in this journal, but they don't allow preprints in medRxiv. Can you take it down? They won't do that. They will withdraw it for scientific reasons, but not for reasons like that. They are also currently participating in a pilot with PubMed that allows preprint manuscripts to be indexed in PubMed. You might have seen it in a PubMed search that there are now unpeer-reviewed preprint manuscripts that get returned with your PubMed search results. There's a huge banner that tells you it's unpeer-reviewed and it's a manuscript to hopefully avoid any confusion. But what's nice about this is that it gets a record from medRxiv into PubMed really quickly, and you're not waiting 6 months to a year for the journal to do all of the reviewing, to do all of the copy editing. It's getting it right into PubMed very quickly. And also it's putting it in PubMed Central as well, if applicable. So that's medRxiv. Again, there's tons of other different preprint servers that are out there. They all sort of spawn off of arXiv, which originated up in Ithaca. So it's a little Cornell connection for you. And there's kind of subject specific, based on what you're working on. But for here and at Weill Cornell, medRxiv is going to be the place you're going to want to look first if you're interested in doing this. So what a record in medRxiv looks like is essentially this. So this is a preprint that has been uploaded about a year ago, and it had been since published, and there is now a link to the published version of the article, and that pretty much meets the requirements for many journals and publications. So this is done automatically. You don't have to worry about this, and you're good to go. So moving on to not just medRxiv, but in other types of repositories that exist that can potentially take things like preprints or postprints. And we're going to throw a really broad term out there for repositories. And that's essentially a place that will accept any kind of material, generally no screening, generally no review process. And it's essentially just a cloud-based location for your material to make it shareable. So depending on the platforms that you're using, some may allow you to update your record and some may not. So I know for things like our institutional repository, you can't update the record once it's been uploaded. It's very difficult to, I should say. So you basically are meant to upload it into these repositories when you have a final version. And because of this, it's a little easier to upload your post prints to these sorts of organizations. So they come in tons of different options and styles depending on sort of what you're interested in doing. We have an institutional repository at Weill Cornell that's linked to Ithaca's issue. We have a link there. And we're kind of continually working on building up our corpus of manuscripts in the IR. So if I haven't emailed you yet about putting your recently published manuscripts in the IR, I will eventually. So keep an eye out for that. And the reason we really want to push for that is so we can keep copies of all Weill Cornell manuscripts sort of in-house, and then eventually link to them on PubMed as well. There's a government repo called PubMed Central. This is for all NIH-funded research. So if you are NIH-funded, you've already had a lot of dealings with PubMed Central, I assume. And if you are not, you probably will at some point in your career. So again, government repositories like PubMed Central only are interested in your postprints. So they want to have the peer review comments and resolutions there. And then there are things like third-party, kind of unaffiliated repositories. One of the more popular ones being something called Zenodo that CERN in Europe sort of runs. And it's another great place to host your either preprint or your postprint, depending on sort of what you're allowed to share. Very great tool. So you can either go local with us, the Weill Cornell Institutional Repository. If you're NIH funded, you can put it in something like PubMed Central, or if you just have a paper you're interested in getting out there, you can toss that in Zenodo. Again, there's not a ton of support for Zenodo in the IR. It is basically a set it and forget it type of situation. So you upload it and you sort of move on. So with all of those different kind of options, I have a couple scenarios here that hopefully should be able to clear up a little bit of confusion. So we'll say you're working on a manuscript that you want to make available before journal acceptance or publication. So that's going to be going the preprint route. And what you're basically going to want to do finish your manuscript, always first important step. Look at a list of potential journals that you're going to be interested in submitting to. And if you don't have a list, the library can help out with that. Check to see if journals allow deposition of preprints. That is a terrible typo, prep tiny, should be preprint, to preprint servers. So you have that, take that list, go to Sherpa Romeo, see if you're allowed to do what you want to do with it. If you have the go, determine which preprint server you want to upload it to, medRxiv being the one I recommend. Go ahead and upload it to there. At the same time, upload it to the journal, whatever the first journal on your list is. And then you sort of do the whole process, the review process. The article ends up getting published, and then go back and make sure that the preprint server record is updated with a link to the final published article. And again, medRxiv will do that for you. So that's another benefit for using them. So for scenario 2, which is going to be uploading it after journal acceptance, and for this, you're going to want to be interested in the postscript, or the postprint. Again, finish your manuscript, develop your journals, check to see if they allow you to deposit your postprint to individual repositories. Upload your manuscript to the journal. It gets accepted and published. Then you sort of go about the task of uploading it into a repository or archive. So preprints are before acceptance of publication. Postprints generally are for after acceptance of publication. So those are the two sort of methods that you're going to use when you are interested in sharing your unpublished version of your manuscript. So again, preprints, relatively new. Postprints have been talked about in this way for at least a decade, a little more. But those are kind of the two things that are floating about in the kind of scholarly publishing space right now as alternatives to journal publishing, traditional journal publishing. So that is all I had. Like I said, I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions because it is a bit of a confusing landscape and it changes all the time. So we could take questions now through the presentation, or if you have any questions that you'd rather write down or any issues that might come up later, wcm-ir@med.cornell.edu will get sent to our institutional repository team here at Weill and up at Cornell Ithaca that can answer any questions about copyright, which we didn't really get into, legal issues, what's the best place to put stuff depending on what it is, where you are in the process, things like that. So that is the best way to get in touch with us directly, or we can take any questions right now. Any questions?
I think we'll just give people a couple minutes to see if they post anything in the chat. So again, cool. For those of you who signed on a little later, if you do have questions for Drew, feel free to hit the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom window and you can post any questions in there and then we'll answer them right now. Oh, there we go.
So the best thing to do while that's coming in, if you ever have any questions about this stuff, just reach out to us at the library, because there's not a sort of global statement that applies to all journals or all publishers or all articles. You kind of have to look at it. Each case is unique. So I have this type of manuscript for this type of journal. Here's what I want to do with it, and we can sort of provide some feedback and guidance on that.
It looks like you're getting some questions in, Drew.
Cool. Let me see. So after the journal accepts a paper, will it continue to appear as a preprint from medRxiv? So it will still appear in medRxiv, but it will look like this, where it will say now published in journal XYZ. In PubMed, it also, I should have taken a screenshot of that. In PubMed, it will also still appear, but it will link to the full PubMed record of it. So hopefully that answers that question for you. Any benefit to bioRxiv versus medRxiv? medRxiv right now is what is being used in the PubMed pilot. So that is the reason that I would push people towards that. It will increase the views of your article for people who only search PubMed. But technically, no. They both have very similar approaches. They're basically built on the same platform too. So no, there's no real practical benefit to it. I would still push people as long as it's applicable to medRxiv though, just to get into PubMed. I actually don't know if there's notifications. So question from Kevin, someone who I definitely don't know. How do comments in medRxiv work? Is there a notification? Do they need to respond? I don't believe there is a notification or a need to respond, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I can reach out directly and with an answer to that question, unless someone else already knows.
Looks like you have another one. Say your paper's just been accepted from Neil.
Sure. So a paper's been accepted. Will it be a couple months before it comes out? Can you deposit the pre-reviewed manuscript in the preprint archive at this point? No. So they are only interested in papers that have not yet been accepted. Again, there might be other, I'm just speaking specifically about medRxiv, there might be other preprint servers that I'm not familiar with, but they will not want it after it's been accepted. So once that acceptance has happened, you're sort of in the post-print phase now. So you can start looking at where you can deposit your post-print, again, an IR or something like Zenodo.
Thanks, Drew. Any other questions that we might have today? I'll leave it for a couple minutes, but just again, for those who signed in late, I am recording the session and any links that Drew shared during his presentation, particularly to the institutional repository email address. If you do have questions later on, I'll make sure that you all get that in a follow-up email. So if you do think of something after this, you're more than welcome to send any inquiries that way.
Cool.
Is there a list of journals that allow preprints?
So there's not a global list. The best thing to do is to go to Sherpa Romeo. You can't actually export the data if you're Excel inclined, and then filter that by their tags. So it's not an exact list because these things constantly change. But that would be the best way to get sort of a global look at what journals are out there that allow these kinds of things. It's getting, like I said, it's getting very rare that journals don't allow preprints these days. And I can't even think of one that has come across our desk recently where that wasn't allowed. But it's potentially still an issue that you have to be aware of. But you can be pretty confident that at least sharing a preprint will be allowed because there's that potential to be very different from the final published version of record.
Oh, and then there was a follow-up that I think, can we submit to multiple preprint servers?
No, I mean, you can technically, but it's frowned upon. So if you're looking specifically at one of the archives, they will typically discourage you from doing that.
Is there a downside to simply putting a preprint on, oh, sorry, I don't know. I'm not pursuing.
Archive, yeah.
Archive. Okay, I was like, I'm just making sure I say
yes, downside to simply putting a preprint and not pursuing publication. I mean, you're risking a lack of peer review. So I think there's always going to be a little bit of a bias against preprint manuscripts that don't make it to full publication, namely because they're never going to be peer reviewed. Whether or not that's valid, we don't really know yet. So there's definitely very good things that haven't necessarily gone through peer review yet. So we're not quite sure how that works. And then you're going to be missing out on some indexing. So right now there's a pilot for getting medRxiv into PubMed. We don't know what's going to be the result of that. So they might decide to stop doing that. So it might turn out that if you put stuff only into these preprint servers, they're only going to be discoverable through Google, which is not necessarily a bad thing. We all use Google every day, so that's not a problem. But there's still going to be a subset of people who only rely on publication databases, your PubMed, your Web of Science, your Scopus, things like that. Not necessarily things only discoverable through Google Scholar. So it's really discoverability that's the main thing, lack of peer review, and a little less discoverability. But practically, not really.
I don't see any more questions in the chat, although I do see that Andy shared that database link with everybody. I'll make sure that's in the follow-up email as well. But you have it there if you guys want to look at it in the chat.
That's a great tool. They have a sister site for data called Juliet. Very original naming convention. That's interesting as well if you do data stuff.
Well, I don't see more questions, though we did get a good amount. We can wrap this up, and I will make sure that everybody gets the follow-up info. Oh, wait, there's one more. Sorry. What is the data sister thing?
Oh, Juliet.
There we go. If you have a link to that, or I can just look it up, I can make sure that I send that out as well to everybody.
Okay.
And then, so yes, I'll if you've registered for today's session, I definitely have your email handy. I'm going to send everything probably by the end of today. And then thank you so much, Drew and Andy, for telling us about preprints today. And is there anything else that you want to share before we complete the session today?
I don't.
Okay. No problem. Oh, I see a few people put the link to Juliet.
Oh, cool.
I'll make sure that that's in the email as well. But if there's nothing else, thank you so much, Drew, for sharing this with us today. And have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.